Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jess Loveland. Welcome to this BFI Network live webinar. We're going to be focusing today on COVID-safe production, something that everybody's thinking about at the minute. And today we're joined by our good friends and colleagues from the National Film and Television School. We've got Jon Wardle here, who is director of the NFTS, and Annalise Davis, who is head of production. Jon and Annalise and the whole NFTS team have been working really hard over the past few months to prepare their students for the reality of shooting in a COVID-safe way. And I think you've shot all your graduation shorts now, haven't you?
All but animation.
Right.
That's a long one.
Yeah, that always takes a while. And they're across fiction and documentary. And so they're really keen to share their learning and insight with filmmakers who are thinking about taking on something similar in the next little while. As for Network, we've started to return to production as well. And so we thought it would be a great time to have a chat about what we've been doing, processes that NFTS and Network have been putting in place, and to also hear from some of the filmmakers who have shot their films under the COVID guidelines. We're going to have some time for a Q&A towards the end of the session, so do feel free to drop questions into the Q&A box on your Zoom screens. I'm going to be hanging around in the chat, so if anybody wants to engage there or chat to one another, please do. So please note also that today we're going to be sharing insight into the processes that NFTS and Network have been developing, which we hope will be really helpful to filmmakers. But just to emphasize, we're not health and safety professionals and we can't give out specific advice relating to individual projects. So please do bear that in mind, but we will try and be as helpful in terms of talking about what we've been doing and what we've learned along the way. So I'm going to hand over now to Jon, who's going to kick off by telling us a bit about the NFTS. Jon.
Thank you very much, Jess, and thanks for inviting us to be part of this. And just looking at who's in the attendees list, lots of familiar names. So lovely to see you all here. Hope this is going to be helpful for you. I'm going to hand you over to Annalise in just a minute, who's going to give you the real nuts and bolts of what we did, but just a bit of context for you before we dive in. So the NFTS is a school of around 500 students, the majority of whom are on really practical hands-on courses, from assistant directing to production design, from cinematography to producing. And we closed the school on the 16th of March 2020 and didn't reopen for any face-to-face activity till June the 8th. And so moving online was a really big feat for the school, both for staff and for students. And during that period, we did all we could to ensure that we kept students moving forwards with their courses. So we immediately moved to online delivery. So we had cinematography teachers tutoring lighting from their garages and seminars on budgeting and development seminars. We shipped more than 80 computers to student homes so that visual effects artists and composers and editors could continue to work. We ran an open house program so that our students from different disciplines could benefit. The big benefit of online is numbers become less of a factor. So we were running seminars that were cross school in a way that we hadn't really been able to do so much before. And we really pushed into masterclasses. So we were really fortunate to have over 50 people come and do masterclasses over 12 weeks with people like David Fincher and Steve McQueen and Elizabeth Moss. And also, because students are students and can't claim universal credit, we also made some hardship monies available that have been donated by the industry. And we're able to help about 60 students stay afloat financially during what was a really tricky time. But during all of that, which was enough in itself, we were also trying to plot our way back into production and thinking about what that would look like for us. We're going to talk mainly about fiction today, our drama slate, but we also make natural history projects, documentary projects, entertainment, shiny floor shows, and animation. And for us, it was never a question of if we would go back into production with the current students. It was always about when and how. And that wasn't the case for everybody. I did a seminar like this with some university colleagues, and many of those were told to move away from practical production work and simply to set essays instead of practical projects in order to finish the year on time. But that was never an option for us. We also didn't feel it was an option for the students hit by this kind of pandemic in this year to ask them to totally rethink their films. We know that in some cases, people were asked to come, in other places were asked to completely rewrite their scripts or to move to a much less kind of high-tech production approach with using kind of smaller cameras and mainly shooting outside. We didn't think any of that was really an option for us. Our students had conceived these projects, they'd had this vision for what their graduation films were going to be, and we wanted to deliver on that ambition. So we accepted it would cost us more money, and although painful because we don't have any money, we allocated an extra 30% to each of the films. And from speaking with industry colleagues, that's a kind of rough number that a lot of people talk about, is a kind of 20 to 30% uplift in costs. And Annalise and others will be able to talk a bit about where that money went. The other thing we did was we added a day to people's shooting schedules. I think in hindsight, we could ask questions about whether that was necessary, but at the point in April, May, of trying to get students to think positively about what they were going to do, rather than thinking that they'd just lost a huge amount, we felt that it was going to be slower. We wanted people to act safely. So there was kind of, again, a rule of thumb that potentially 10 to 15% slower as you do things consecutively rather than concurrently on set. And so we added a shooting day to people's schedules. And then there was the key question of the timing of the restart. One school of thought was wait till September when things would be better. I was adamant that they wouldn't be, and I'm pleased that that was the case. I always felt that it was important to make hay while the sun shone. I thought with the weather at its best, with the longest days, but also if things were to go wrong, I felt like we might need September and October in order to play catch up on things that got delayed. Whereas if we didn't start till September, our wiggle room would be even less. So we started shooting at the end of July, and I think, Annalise, correct me if I'm wrong, we finished our kind of most of our slate yesterday. So we've now concluded fiction, television entertainment, documentary, natural history, with just animation left to shoot. And so while making those kind of bigger decisions, we were also monitoring what was going on in the industry in terms of guidelines and protocols for production. So I'm a member of the BFI task force, and the BFC had been kind of set out to move forward the guidelines for that. So Annalise and I were closely monitoring what was going to come out of those groups and seeing drafts of that. But obviously we're not Jurassic World. We're a small film school with limited budgets. And so what we were going to do was going to have to be different to what a Jurassic World or a Little Mermaid or a Batman was going to do. And so we needed to carefully consider what was set out in those documents and adapt where necessary. So that's probably enough context. I'm happy to answer questions later on, but Annalise, why don't you pick it up from there, the story from there?
Thanks, John. So yeah, as John said, we consulted a lot with the industry. We're very industry facing anyway as a film school. So I was talking a lot to Working Title, Netflix, Call the Midwife, who were really helpful, but we were all operating in a world where nobody had done it before. So we were trying to chart a new territory, which was challenging and exciting. As John said, we kept a close eye on the BEC2 guidelines, and the first thing we did was took them and adapted them to short filmmaking, because the BEC2 guidelines are long and quite fluid, and we tried to make them, adapt them for our short films. But what we realized quite quickly is they are long, they're a little bit open, and we needed to do something that was a little bit more hands-on and interactive. So what we started to do was formulate what we call our method statements. And the idea with a method statement is that every department inputs into it, and we gave information for each department. For example, sound, you must have different protocols for changing the mics than you normally would. And then we asked them to input themselves. So the point of the method statement document was that it covered all departments, and it was students had to input into it. It wasn't just us telling students what to do. So we tested this out. We actually started testing on the 3rd of June when we got HODs and visiting tutors, and we all made a film ourselves over a day. Because the point about the NFTS is all the people who work at the NFTS have industry experience, and actually what we wanted to do was try everything out before asking students to do something, because we didn't want to ask them to do something we didn't have experience of. So we did a 1-day test shoot, the film of which is available online, and that helped us formulate the method statement and actually helped us get our heads around what it felt like to shoot with COVID, because, you know, 3rd of June, that was all of us coming out of lockdown for the first time. So that was quite a weird feeling and ultimately quite exhilarating to be out and about. And then from there, we shot commercials the next week. We do 10 one-day commercials, and we shot them from the 10th of June. So again, this was us working our way into how we would best use these method statements before we did grad fiction, which are probably our most ambitious films in that they're 8 days long with much bigger crews. So from this, we were able to refine the method statement. We had things like each location had to be worked through. So depending on your location size, you have to work out how many meters squared is allowed per crew member. And then we zoned off each crew. So if you had a very small location, the method statement had to outline how many people, literally which crew members were allowed on set. So we became quite detailed, and it also helped us work through the additional costs, which mainly go on catering, because we had to have professional caterers. So it's fine if you're just Jurassic World, you always have professional caterers, but with short films, you tend to be a bit looser. We couldn't be, we just had to spend money on professional caterers. Travel, obviously you can't have the same number of people in cars. So that put money on travel, and public transport is frowned upon. So we tried not to use that too. Accommodation, any kind of residential shoot cost more money because we had to have single accommodation. And then obviously cleaning and testing of actors, which I'll come to. As a school, we provided COVID supervisors for every shoot, which Sunny Baines, our very good health and safety manager, trained up. And we also just provided all the PPE as well as a sort of separate thing from the budget anyway. So the COVID supervisor helped the students, not for a huge amount of time in prep, because we knew the students had to take responsibility for each of their departments, because COVID is something everybody has to engage with. But they would go through their preparations with them in more detail and be on set to help stick to the guidelines and stick to the 2 meters. So that was sort of behind camera. So we sort of sussed out behind camera through our own work and through commercials. And obviously in front of camera is more challenging. And again, we created cast methodology documents, which was essentially, we asked the students to put everything into red, amber and green ratings. Green scenes were ones that were clearly possible to do with 2 meter distancing. Amber was, yes, we can do it with 2 meter distancing, but we have to write a bit more information down. And the red was like, clearly, we're going to break 2 meters, and how are we going to do it? And so for each of the scene, we asked what the mitigation was, because once you break 2 meters, you have to think about how you're mitigating against it. Either you wear PPE, or you can do things like you can have composite shots. If you have a 2-shot, you can always do composites, rarely, but you can. Or the actors are from the same household, or you've asked them to isolate, or you test. So that's again how we worked it through. And what I would say about testing, which we did on 6 of our 8 films, is it's not a magic bullet. It's quite hard, it's quite expensive, and testing is, you know, the first time we did testing, it was on a film with about 5 actors who needed testing, and we all got quite a shock because it was really quite challenging. You need to have 2 weeks lead time. You need to test twice before you get into your first day shoot. You need to think about how you're going to isolate them after testing. You have to think about their home life. There are loads of details that you have to work through. So I think maybe going in, we thought, oh, we can test. And it was only part way through we realized it's really quite challenging. So but we got through it all, and we shot our 8 fiction grads, obviously a slightly delayed start, but we finished them in mid-September, as Jon said, alongside a whole lot of other fiction films. I've my 3 golden rules, which I thought to try and distill everything we learned as easy as possible. The first is, it doesn't matter what guidelines there are available, you have to have a bespoke approach to COVID on every film. You have to go through every location, every scene, every shot. Sometimes it's bespoke, so I can help, but I can't fully give the answers. The second one is, it's all about the prep, not the shoot. We did give an extra day, but in actual fact, the prep is incredibly intense and much more detailed than usual. So if you need more time, put it in prep. And actually the shoots went pretty well and didn't necessarily need that extra time. And the third golden rule is, testing is really hard. You can do it, but it takes time and care. So that's it from me. I'm very happy to answer questions later. So with me, we have 2 of our students. Emma Hanson is a producer of a film called When She Was Good. Marcus Thomas is the director of a film called Caterpillar. So they're going to talk to you, both fiction grad films, both have finished their films. Marcus is just about to picture lock. So I'll hand over to Emma so she can talk about the experience of producing a film under COVID.
Thanks, Annalise. As Annalise said, very detailed in terms of the prep that we went through. When COVID hit, we were just sort of in development of our script, and part of that time was just trying to figure out how we approach it. And a lot of feeling at the time was, as Annalise said, not to tweak the scripts, to try and make them more COVID friendly. Actually, a lot of industry people were doing that as well, because they weren't quite sure how long this was going to go on for. So a lot of that was trying to predict the future and see what was going to happen. And after a while, we just sort of gave up trying to figure out what was going to happen, and just kind of have to adapt to what you're doing and what you want to achieve. So we just kind of ploughed on. Our script, luckily, is kind of not logistically ambitious. It's more sort of story ambitious. We really wanted to focus on the dynamics between the characters and the story and the twist in the plot. And so we're all kind of set in one house at Christmas time, which kind of made it logistically easier for COVID, because what we discovered is that actually during prep, as Annalise said, every single aspect of it was affected by COVID. Casting, location scouting, all the big things that you would kind of expect, but then just down to how you interact with your team, how you manage your team, absolutely everything was affected by COVID. So prep was absolutely crucial. I think we ended up shooting slightly later than the grad films usually at the NFTS, which in the schedule of the filming meant that we had slightly longer for development and slightly longer in prep, I kind of felt. And that was absolutely essential. And absolutely what Annalise said is, like, we had a really good prep time, and we just had to kind of really drill into the detail of everything. And because we had a bit of extra time to do that, it meant that our shoot was kind of quite straightforward. Everything was ironed out, everything was in place. We had to know exactly who was going to pick up who, so that we could get everybody there safely. So in a lot of ways, COVID, although it was a horrific time for a lot of people, kind of benefited our film in some ways, because we just had to be so organised and so disciplined with our filmmaking practice to make it safe and actually be allowed to do it. And the shoot, actually, in the end, I think there was a lot of anxiety leading up to the shoot for a lot of people, because none of us had made a film in that way before. None of us really knew how it was going to be. No one really understood how the vibe was going to be on set, which is quite important, especially because we had children in our film as well. So we wanted to keep it quite a fun environment for them, to keep them happy. And none of us knew. And actually the first day or two was kind of interesting, as everybody was getting into the flow of it. And then everybody just kind of relaxed, and you get used to the disciplines and the extra habits that you have to take on with sort of sanitizing and face masks and all the procedures. And once you get past the kind of first day or two, it's kind of just like a normal shoot, and you get into those habits, and then you still have all the other problems that you would normally have, like people being late or things not being thought about or considered, and then it just becomes kind of a normal shoot. And we actually had a lot of fun in the end, which I never really expected, but it was a huge amount of fun, and we were really proud of what we shot in the end. So for me, it was a really positive experience, and one that I'm really glad that we got through safely. Yeah, and Marcus, is, as Annalise said, is the director of Caterpillar, and I'm not entirely sure how your experience was, Marcus. His was slightly different to ours because they shot in a studio, so I'll let him explain.
Yeah, so yeah, hi everyone, first of all. So I guess to begin with, it was actually quite a good thing being locked down, because I was writing the script and had absolutely zero distractions other than focusing on writing that. So that was a positive. But I guess beyond that, my script features Vietnamese characters, and we were looking specifically for a young boy who was ideally bilingual. And we'd always kind of, we actually used Heather Baston casting for that. And we'd kind of initially had plans to maybe go and kind of enter the Vietnamese community a bit and like leaflet and try and street cast and speak to people, but it kind of just destroyed all of that. So all we could do really was kind of post on social media, and beyond that, it basically meant that we're kind of very, very limited with our options in who we could kind of approach for casting, because there's not a huge pool of talent. He kind of fitted that bill, so that was quite difficult. And then the auditions was quite a weird process, because it was the first time I'd actually ventured out the house, I think. So I was kind of forced into going into London and kind of having like a very sanitized space and kind of doing that all at a distance, which was a good experience in terms of really being hot on it, in terms of like the distancing and kind of thinking about even things as small as like props being passed between each other just can't happen. So so that was all kind of interesting. And then yeah, the pre-production itself was, I think that's where we actually needed the most time. Was pre-production just took much longer, because it's always quite intense and you're kind of always up against it anyway, regardless when you're doing a shoot. But COVID just added like a whole other layer of things to think about. So we spent a lot of conversations kind of, as Annalise was saying, going through like the method statement and making sure we'd had to have like our shot list done and planned and prepped like really detailed anyway, as I like to do. But beyond that, we then had to go through the whole thing again and think, okay, where are the actors actually in physical space? Like, what are they passing between each other? How are we allowed to break distancing and whatever else? And with that, we designed a set. And so the set kind of got brought into the conversations around COVID. So do we have enough access points? Can we make this room any bigger without it kind of affecting the story or anything like that? So there was just a whole lot of conversations around it, which I'm not going to sit here and say it's not annoying, but ultimately, like, you have to just keep reminding yourself it's actually life and death. So it's really, really important to kind of take it seriously. And then beyond that, on the shoot, when we finally got down to, I'll go into testing as well. So luckily enough, I wrote it 5 years ago, and it's very, very contained. So there's only like two main actors, and the child that we actually cast and the main older guy who spends most of the time together in the film, they're actually family friends. So I think as time was passing and the guidelines were changing, we were actually allowed to kind of allow them to form a bubble. So there was isolating anyway, and they just kind of created part of their own social bubble. So we worked it that way. And for the other guys, I actually wrote 5 years ago that there would be masked men who come into the house. So they were actually just wearing masks, weirdly. So there's only like one point in the story where they take them off. And at that point, I think we had to kind of get the other actor who was kind of off screen in a mask and a visor so that they could take theirs off. But beyond it, that was kind of the most difficulty I got into. I think there was a point where we kind of, on the day, we kind of had to make decisions about visors and stuff and how we can kind of adjust shots, but that's kind of necessary anyway. You're always kind of like adjusting things. But yeah, I think beyond that, we kind of just on the shoot itself, there's just like small things around like speaking to your actors in between takes. You have to kind of wait for people to come out of the room before you're allowed to go in. So it takes like a little bit longer. And then beyond that, I didn't really realise how much I whispered to my actors, but that was kind of the thing. I kept like wanting to just like whisper direction into one of their ears, but that's just kind of not possible. So there was just things around that which were kind of a bit more tricky. But beyond that, you do kind of just fall into a workflow after about like 1 or 2 days, which I feel like you kind of do with most shoots anyway, because they all have their own difficulties. So it just felt like an extension of that. And it helped actually with the commercials going on. My cinematographer had already kind of done a couple of those and was just like, it's actually not that bad. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on the first ADs because there's a lot more that kind of they have to be on top of, but ultimately like it's people kind of being in charge of their own stuff and in their own kind of groups and being hot on it, and yeah, just being vigilant really.
That's great. Thank you very much, guys. Jess, do you want to talk now a little bit about the BFI?
Yes, I'll jump in now. Thanks ever so much, Emma and Marcus. Yeah, I just wanted to update a little bit about what we've been doing because I'm aware that our short film fund has been closed now since early July. We paused that because we had around 40 awarded projects on the slate, and we wanted to make sure that we had robust processes in place to support filmmakers as they moved into production and to minimise risk. And so we didn't want to keep bringing new projects onto the slate that we weren't in a position to shoot safely. So we took some time out over the summer to really interrogate that. We also consulted very widely. One of the people we consulted with was NFTS, who very kindly shared their learning. They were ahead of us in terms of their thought processes around moving into production. So we spoke to NFTS, we spoke to colleagues in production here at BFI, industry colleagues within the insurance industry, and also health and safety specialists such as First Option, who have been incredibly helpful to us. And so we built a very similar framework to the one that Jon and Annalise have described previously. Something else that we did was uplift the budgets on the shorts, roughly around 20 to 30%. It seems to average out at, which is very similar to the figure that Jon mentioned previously. So we've been finding that as well. We have also been training up the producers on the projects and the first ADs as COVID supervisors. So First Option run a sort of enhanced COVID supervisor training course, and yeah, we've been sending some of the teams on that so that they can hear firsthand, you know, how, you know, precisely what the best practice, industry best practice is. And the great thing about that is then they're certified as COVID supervisors, so they can go and work on other productions. We shot our first short film, Coconut, in the north of England in September, and we're delighted to have the director, Ndrika Anyika, here, and producer Fozia Khaliq, and they can talk to us a little bit about their approach to production and their experience on set. So I've got some questions that I'm going to whip through, if that's okay. And I wanted to start off by asking what your film's about, and why, you know, why you wanted to tell it, why you, yeah.
Of course. So I have to get a bit closer because my mic's a bit rubbish, so sorry. So yeah, the film Coconut is about a girl who's trying to assimilate into a very northern, very white town, Rotherham. She herself is Ugandan, and she was born in Uganda and she moved to the UK when she was 8. And ever since then, she's been struggling to find her identity, who she belongs with, and who accepts her. And a lot of the time, she's trying to find acceptance in her friendships and also in her family. And yes, she struggles throughout.
And how long had you been developing that idea? Was this a pre-COVID idea that you'd had? So yeah.
So we were developing this from last year, I'd say April. I met with the writer Jackie, and then Fozia came on board as our producer. and we were going to be filming last year, and then it got pushed back to, I think, was it May initially, this May?
I think it was more March-ish. I can't really remember, but I think we were going to shoot in May. That was the last plan.
Obviously didn't happen. But yeah, to be honest, for me, it meant more prep time, more research time, more figuring out a way that I want to work with actors. This is the biggest budget and biggest crew that I've directed, so it was helpful for me, really, more prep.
And had you two worked together in the past, or was this your first experience working as a team?
No, first time.
Oh, baptism of fire, or what?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, we had that year to kind of build
Yeah.
our relationship, so it felt,
Yeah, it felt, I think when we started shooting, it was the second time we'd actually physically met, but it felt like I feel like I've known Ndrika for years.
And
Jack.
I was just going to say, Fozia was really good at keeping in touch and touching base throughout. So we'd speak quite a lot just about random topics and themes that feature within the film. So yeah.
That's great. And so you said it'd been pushed to about May time, and then obviously that didn't happen. Was there a part of you that thought, oh, we'll just park it and wait until next year, till 2021? No, you were going to jump in. Yeah.
No, I think we were quite, let's say, aggressive with our determination of making this film happen. I think we'd all, since we'd met and been brought in and we're talking with the themes of the film, the backstory behind the film is that the Coconut is spearheaded by a team of Black and Asian female makers. And us coming together, some of the conversations we were having, like between like the three of us, a lot of the conversations and themes and ideas were feeding back into our everyday, into our own ambitions. And I think we really did encourage and support a lot of development for ourselves in our own position throughout this whole year. So I think that gave us lots of fuel to just keep going. And I was always very determined to carry on making the film. There were, when we got close to the dates and of actually going into pre-production, there was that balance of like, which week are we sitting in, how will it pan out? But we had to just trust one another, and pull through. And I think it did work really well for us.
Yeah, and I think a big thing to mention that I didn't is that Coconut, the majority of it is shot in the Peak District outside. So I know that was another factor that kind of made us feel a bit more confident. Just a few of the BFI shorts, I know that some of them had crowds involved, and
yeah,
so we were quite lucky.
Yeah, there was certain elements that you like, small children, babies, care homes, can't shoot any of those. Yeah. So what was your, knowing then that you were going to shoot in the time of COVID under the guidelines and all the restrictions, how did you go about approaching prep, building your team, applying the guidance to the production, and just sort of managing that process yourself?
It was an awful lot of work. And I think what I did was bring in a contact I had as a production manager really early on, and work really closely with her. And I formed a really great relationship with her, and we're going to work together again. And for me, it was research and then open questions with your team, and sharing information, and then assessing, and then more research, and then the changes. Because from all of the period that we were developing, we went through a period with no COVID, that didn't exist. Then COVID, I have no idea what's going on. It was pre-apocalyptic at some points, and we really didn't know what the world was going to be like. And then with working really kind of extensively, I sought out from a first AD that I know from the industry. He found a COVID contact testing course with Coursera, so that was going around. So I did that. It was quite lengthy. our production manager did that. I kind of shared it with whoever was about. We just more information, and then when networks started feeding through the changes, there we'll have it. And it was kind of assessing the information we had against the information we were given and making very just sensible decisions. I just think it was very logical, sensible decision making that really helped, and an organization that really helped the film happen and run smoothly. And we had a really similar experience where it was really extremely fun on set and really enjoyable still. And we did have the luxury of it being an exterior shoot, for like minimal actors. Ventilation wasn't an issue, social distance, and we had lots of space to work with majority of the time. But yeah, just a lot of prep work, like a huge amount of being in front of the computer and having lots of Zooms and phone calls.
Yeah. So communications was a massive thing then, making sure that everybody was looped in all the time, knew what was happening, what was expected.
Yeah, I was like completely lots of phone calls and emails following up, making, because on a short film, like, you have to assume that freelancers they're coming off and on commercials, long-term projects. Where a small enthusiastic short film, they you know, they kind of could ignore some of the information that came through. So always following up with conversations, getting to which helped because I got to know people a lot more. So by the time the shoot came, like, you did really feel like you knew everybody on set already.
And I think as well, taking it off email when we got a bit closer, I think say maybe 2 weeks or a week before, things started to move to WhatsApp, and that was super helpful for me as a director working with HODs. I had head of costume video when doing video calls when they were buying costumes and sending pictures. It was just so much snappier. So we set up WhatsApp groups for all the HODs, and that worked so well.
WhatsApp group, yeah, you can't beat a good WhatsApp group for like instant communication, can you? And how did you find approaching working with actors in a socially distanced manner? Was that more challenging, Ndrika, or?
I think for myself, because the rehearsals that I've done before, the short films I've worked with, have been so minimal that this really has been the first time that I've had that amount of time to rehearse with actors. So I don't really know what to compare it to, but I just try to fit in as much rehearsal time as possible. So I think with each actor, initially I do a Zoom call with them, just introducing ourselves and making them feel comfortable, and then meeting with the other main cast and then doing the table read all over Zoom. But before we even got to, you know, running lines, I think we'd met, say, 2 or 3 times. And it was a lot of character development via Zoom. So there was a lot of trying to make the characters, have the actors have ownership over the characters and kind of make them feel comfortable with each other. And so I think that really helped as much time as possible with the actors, yeah.
And I think from my perspective, I remember we brought in our production manager. She was, she's a graduate of the Brit School, so she's an actress as well. She was, so she really helped at the audition stage with you, didn't she?
Oh yeah, the audition stage. So we put out an audition on Spotlight.
We used Spotlight, yeah.
Production manager set that up. She was incredible with the Excel spreadsheets that she created, and so I'd download the videos and then pop them in there, and then we'd look over them together. And it was helpful to have another person to, like a sounding board, but also to just be there, record the Zooms. We did all that so we could then show the other members of the crew. So yeah, an extra person. She was great.
Yeah, I think why we got on as a team, because she was very anal, we're very similar, and spreadsheets and kind of information shared, and she was all across that with me. I was like, yay, that was good. We're across everything. And I think we spent another huge amount of time working, finding the right actor as well.
Yeah, I imagine making them feel comfortable. You know, it's challenging anyway, but particularly these days, you know, it's putting people at ease and making them feel, getting that sense of, safety and warmth on set, I guess. It's worth putting the effort in.
And I think because of what our script touches on, and you know, racism, especially in the Black Lives Matter kind of resurgence that was surrounding it, just making sure everyone felt comfortable with the content of the script. And people would come to me with certain, I guess, worries or words that we use, and just wanted to understand that and have that conversation. So it was nice to kind of use our film as a building block to make other people feel more confident in kind of Black Lives Matter and what it's all about.
Yeah. And I think, again, we really felt that, didn't we, from the actors at the end? It was like a family, and like we had gone on a journey together, and they had really bonded through some really like subject matter of what we're doing and the process of kind of seeing one another. And I think that the concept of our film and that dual, you know, Miri, really, was just really exciting, and it was really great to be part of it. Really quite proud of that, really.
It was an opportunity to create a sort of a slightly different culture on set then. That's great. And did you encounter any COVID instances while shooting? Did anything crop up?
Yes. Yes, we had. Yeah, we did. So we had our DIT who came. Yeah, he was remote anyway, but he was on set. He was on set at unit base once, but he did come back to us at the end of day 1, I think, with his, it's very long-winded, but his the person he had been staying with worked in hospital, and he'd been diagnosed with COVID. So it was just like, it was really good because our first idea was really strong and across it. Our production manager was across it, and I was across it as well. And the actual, the DIT was really great with tracking his own journey, but we tracked his flatmate's journey, his flatmate's partner's journey back to last 3 days of where they'd been, where they contracted. They both worked in hospitals, tracked where he'd been staying, you know, ventilation, absolutely every possible aspect and avenue of his journey. We had to track back to analyze it. We had this big meeting the first evening about we like referred to our method statement, our policies, what we'd done, made sure we, you know, assessed whether we'd done everything we should have done, and we had done, and then we presented the information back to the rest of the crew as an in case, because what the fear would be, there's a potential COVID case. If it was a severe COVID case, if it spread, then we'd, you know, that could have gone to actors, it could affect crew, other family members, etc., etc. So we, but luckily, we had Joe take a test and it came back negative, so there wasn't any spread or anything. But it was, thank goodness we did all that prep. Really, so going back and checking in, like, how did we interact? Who did we interact with? And it was mostly me, because I'd seen him. As the producers, you know, one has to see everyone. It was mostly me and the production manager. But yeah, we, you know, and it was good at that happening at the beginning, because it woke everybody. Like, we were already doing very well, but we kind of woke, you know, like, oh, this is actually could happen. Because when you're talking about COVID, if you haven't had any personal experiences yourself, and I think the team, we're all that kind of age group where, you know, we don't show symptoms, or, you know, we're not vulnerable people, you know, we're in that middle ground. So we're not young children, we're not old people, we're not suffering from long-term illnesses. So we were, you know, I personally, like, hadn't had any experiences of any of that around me. It's always been kind of, neither do you and Ndrika, none of us had. But so when we had the actual kind of potential scare, that was interesting. It kind of brought it home a little bit, made us more, you know, just kind of reminded us of what it could do to people, and the importance of implementing, like, real, you know, be taking health and safety quite seriously, which
So it showed your processes worked, basically.
They worked. And I think with best option. Their pre-production or pre-engagement health questionnaire is really useful. I don't know if you guys use that as the NFTS, but that's really useful. I think just having it formalized, so yeah, so we can acknowledge or you know, seek out any potentials there, and like hiring on the basis of that. Like, you don't want to discriminate, but for sake of health and safety.
Yeah, that's great. Any top tips, finally, that you'd like to share with anybody who's thinking of shooting soon?
Well, the one that we chatted about was the Dettol spray. The yeah, that was quite handy. So that's the disinfectant. I think it's for upholstery mostly, but that's if you're in an interior. Or we have our costume. Where we handled our costume was in the seal boxes, the plastic boxes. You can get storage ones, and then we'd spray in there to just disinfect anything, and you could shake it and kind of ventilate it. So that was quite handy.
Great. Sales are going to boom now, Fozia, I think. I'm going to jump into the Q&A box now, because we've had quite a few questions come in whilst everybody was talking. The first one is from AV asking, I'm curious to find out about COVID supervisors on set and whether insurance companies give any extra coverage if there's one in place.
So, sorry. So like I've had before our shoot, I had lots of conversations, like lots of chats with insurance companies about COVID, and generally the ones for the short-term cover we had for the short film were, yeah, they're just like no additional for COVID, no additional insurance for it. And I think that's one huge thing across the industry, COVID and insurance, and that's why some big on feature productions and other things like some independents aren't surviving so well because of that liability on a production. If your production gets shut down because of a COVID scare, you lose money. So no, it doesn't. From my understanding, the insurance doesn't really cover any COVID insurance. Like if you caught COVID, you're not covered, essentially.
Yeah. The government restart scheme, there was an announcement on Friday, wasn't there? That they opened.
Yeah, they've announced it, but it might not be so relevant for short films. I know for short films you can top up and insure against cast getting COVID, but the cost might end up being more than make it work. It possibly not. We didn't effectively, we underwrote our own films at the NFTS, so the insurance wasn't an issue in that way.
Yes, we've been doing the same, but we're keeping an eye on that restart fund just to see if it is feasible for shorts. Yeah. I've got a question here from Claire Levy asking about applications to city film offices to ease the flow of communication. I think this is one for the NFTS guys. I think Claire works at a university. We have a possible 40 student teams applying to shoot around Bath, and we want to make sure the already busy film office there won't be overwhelmed.
Although in Claire's question, she says they are now saying they want to sign everything off. So in a way, they're creating that problem for themselves. I guess for us, it's about scheduling of the slate overall and not 40 films going out at once. That's possibly easier for us because of the number of productions that we do. But we're in a similar situation where we're liaising with film offices all over the country, and the scale of that can seem a bit scary. But as Claire says, they are now asking for that in some cases, whereas deals might have overridden that previously. So all I'd say is I just have a conversation with them about what they can cope with, when do they want them, e.g. not 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, more notice. I mean, a lot of what we've talked about in this session so far is about the importance of prep. And a lot of people I talk to are saying, actually, there's been a really good discipline we've got back into with COVID, that we are actually prepping the films in the way that we might have done when people were shooting on film rather than on digital, and thinking much more carefully about where you put people where resources are going. So I think it's the same thing with this query really, which is have a conversation with them and say, how can we help you? You want to see them all, but how do I give them to you in a way that isn't going to overwhelm you?
That's good advice. Thanks, John. Question here for Marcus about your point around props. Did a dedicated resource do this?
Yeah, so with props, so with the auditions, it was us who were in charge of it, but it was a case of making sure it was all sanitized in plastic gloves, and there was no passing between actors at all. It was just like one person holds it and that's kind of it, and then sanitize it in between, or use multiple. And on set, it was, that was the thing I forgot to mention, is that the production designer was very, very busy because only the production designer could touch any of the props. So it was one of those things where you'd be standing right next to something and you'd need to move it like 5 inches to the right, but you'd have to call in the production designer to come and move it because it's only them and the actors who should be touching it. So it just meant that everything was on its own table and all like cleaned ahead of time and in between takes if necessary. And yeah, it could only be passed to other actors if they were like within the bubble or something. If not, you'd have to, I think there's a case in my film where they passed like a glass of drink over to the other person and it had to be someone's own special glass and it was separated and it was given to them and then vice versa. So yeah, production designers are just very, very busy and you have to be on hand the whole time.
Yeah, you kind of you have to keep everything within departments, but you can pass things to each other. You just have to sanitize your hands and they sanitize their hands and don't get place in the bits in between. So yeah, just that much harder.
We were the very first to shoot, so I feel like we were like very sort of like scared about kind of breaking any sort of rule at all. But yeah, sure it's softened slightly now.
Thank you. Question here about COVID supervisor training and if it's open to independent filmmakers. I think John has dropped a link into the chat there. There's lots of different places, well not lots, but there's a few different places you can go to for supervisor training. Screen Skills, First Option are running them, so have a look and see what's out there. But I'd say there's also, you know, check Screen Skills, there's brilliant resources on there. They're running webinars and things regularly as well, so it's always worth checking their website. Got a question about opening up the BFI Network Short Film Fund again in England. So we're hoping to be able to announce something about that in the next few weeks. So keep an eye on the network Twitter and website, but we hope to have the fund open for applications again in the next little while, so it shouldn't be too long for you to wait. Now that the purpose for the pause was to do precisely this, was to build a safe framework that we could roll out and support filmmakers. So we feel that we're at a point now where we can reopen and take on new projects. So yeah, keep an eye on our social channels and the website.
Can I just say something about the supervisor training as well? There, I think for if anybody is out there and they're trying to kind of build CVs, it is really good to have, if they're wondering whether to have it or not to have it, the Screen Skills one, that's free, it's worth doing, and just kind of fill in the knowledge. And we made sure all our crew did it because it's a free resource. I just want to say that.
Yeah, and it's about an hour long as well, isn't it? It's not too time consuming and covers all the fundamentals. Yeah, I've answered that one as well. Oh, this is a nice question for the filmmakers. As creatives, can you give any examples of when COVID regulations impacted your films in a positive manner? There's got to be something in production and post, like did you have to create a shot that you hadn't thought of before, and did this impact well for your storyline? Well, they're all thinking now. Look at those thinking faces.
That's say it all.
Yeah.
I might go on this one. I mean, I maybe my director will disagree, but because of kind of room sizes and limitations on how many people you can safely fit in a room, it really forced us to get a location that would accommodate that, because we were shooting in a house the whole time. The rooms had to be of a certain size, and that actually took quite a lot of locations off the table for us. And the one we did use in the end just looks so beautiful in the film, and it has a really interesting quirk that seeing it now on the big screen as opposed to when you were there really adds to the film. And that was a really hard decision actually, because it wasn't the director's first choice at all, but in many ways it was kind of a logistical choice, but actually I think it worked so well. So yeah, that would be my example.
I think for our film, it changed before COVID, but there was a shot in there and a flashback that involved two of the lead characters kissing, but that got changed just before to have a scene with the lead character and her mother. And so that made me think, okay, I want to go through the script and just see if there's any other things in there that are close proximity that don't push the story forward. So it just made me go back into that script analysis. So I think just generally it makes you have to be more, to scrutinize the script more. And that I think is always a good thing.
That's great. Maybe I've got a question which is sort of related to that. Was there anything process related that the COVID, working within the COVID guidelines forced you to do that you might bring forward onto shoots in a non-COVID world? Was there anything positive about maybe about the prep or the rigor that you had to apply to that you would?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've got it somewhere. My folder, Fozia will recognise this. So I did so much prep, and I didn't know really when working on a film like this what I need to bring on board with me. And Fozia recommended a really great book, I think, if you don't have it already, everyone should get it if you're a director, called Directing Actors. I'm not sure who wrote it, but really just doing all the script analysis and every single shot and motivations and all that kind of thing. And that process I will definitely take on board any film I do, no matter how big or small. Super helpful.
And on a much less inspiring level, we used to give money for food on films and then expect the crews to sort it themselves, really. But I think Annalise is now looking at just moving to professional caterers going forward, because it ended up costing us a lot less than we thought it was going to cost us. Is that right, Annalise?
Yeah, the increase was less, but mainly it's just it becomes so painful for the students all cooking for each other. So I think we've sort of all made the decision that we should stick with cheap professional catering.
We always thought it was going to be really cost prohibitive, and actually it turned out not to be really.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's what you would think, isn't it? That getting external caterers in, professional caterers to do it would be really expensive. Well,
people who don't know what they're doing, shopping for 50 people also can end up being expensive.
Yeah.
I second that with the caterers, because I had to, working on this short film, I come from a features and TV background, so I had to just shrink everything. And our caterers that we were talking with pulled out the Friday before we were due to shoot. But luckily we got an artisan caterer in who did us a deal. So we're very lucky with food on our shoot. We had quite nice munch going on, but that was just chance. I think
that's the most important thing. Everybody has to be fed well, especially if you're outside in a Peak District or yeah. Nice warm food. Got a question here about the method statements, the brilliant method statements, and whether they're accessible to people working on independent productions. I don't know, that's something maybe we can take away and have a chat about. But yes, we'll come back to you on that. I've got somebody here asking about the Short Film Fund and whether people need to take into account COVID issues, rebudget. I'd say if you've got a project now that you're thinking of applying with, look at your script. you know, if it's something that you want to shoot in the next 6 months or so, I would say have a good look at your script, make sure that it's something that is feasible to be shot under the guidelines, and do really interrogate your budget and think about where those extra costs might come in. And we're asking everybody to split out the COVID costs in their budget as well, so we can see what the basic costs are and then what the COVID sort of uplift costs are that have impacted the budget. So just start applying that rigor now, I think, and it will pay off down the line. Kieran Black asking, he's a final year undergrad about to produce his graduate film and wanted to know if there'd be any additional resources from BFI or NFTS to look at helping students prepare to film. Well, I guess this is what we're sort of trying to start the conversation here. It is something that we can maybe keep coming back to as things develop over time. I'd say also talk to your own tutors and your own college or university and see, you know, what they're thinking in terms of moving projects through into production. But yeah, we'll continue to share learning and sort of industry best practice as it seems fit. Is that fair, Jon and Annalise?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll drip feed as we think we've got something more, so we'll drip feed things out. So do keep an eye on our social media as well.
Yeah. And then a question about insurance and liability and how does one overcome the sort of issue of liability if insurance doesn't cover for COVID? Well, we now have the government restart scheme, DCMS restart scheme, which is, I believe it's up and running. That you can get in touch with them now, can't you? You can sort of register your production. Have a look at that. I think it's 1% of the production budget. I am not completely up to date with how it will work for shorts, but we can again keep sharing information about that as it becomes available. We're going to be encouraging our shorts to apply for it if appropriate.
Yes, I'll just say a couple of things. I mean, the first, liability is an interesting word because I don't think people are going to sue you for catching COVID on your film. They might, but I think it would be pretty hard to trace it back to that particular incident. But what you do need to have is all the answers for how you've managed COVID. So that's where things like COVID supervisors and enhanced travel arrangements and catering and what Marcus and Emma and the teams were talking about in terms of how props are handled and costume. You need to have a risk assessment that sets all that stuff out. I think the second thing is at the budget levels we're talking about, we went into it, and I think you're doing the same, Jess, we went into it knowing that if we got halfway through a film and had to pull it, we had to pull it, and we'd have to think about how we remounted it later on. That was more cost effective for us than trying to purchase an insurance. I don't think it was available anyway, but trying to purchase insurance cover that may or may not have paid out if there was a problem. So I think everybody at the moment is going into shoots knowing that you may have to pause them, and so that's why it becomes really important to really be disciplined about the rules, because that minimises the chance of that happening. And we got through all of our fiction shoots without a delay, except for on the last day of filming on one film where somebody went home ill because they thought they might have COVID, and we were lucky because we could draft in another sound recordist to finish that shoot. Not everybody has that option, but we went into it with our eyes open that we may have to schedule and reschedule again. And fortunately, we didn't. Touch wood that we don't have to anymore.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. The more prep you can do,
that's how you protect yourself.
That's the best way that you can protect yourself, definitely. And we've sort of been underwriting the risk as well on our shoots. You know, if anybody had to abandon or delay a production, we would, look to find the money to support them to go back and complete the film. It's easier to do with shorts, isn't it? With features, it's a completely different ball game altogether, isn't it?
Yeah, and as Jon said, we did have a few instances of either people with symptoms or people next to positive COVID tests, but each of them we basically isolated those people, essentially did our own track and trace to check And in the case of the sound people, they were in the same household, so we just took them off the shoot, replaced them. There was an AD at one point, and again, we just made them stay in their hotel room. So, and we were very, very lucky in that we didn't have any actual positive COVID case on a crew member. The closest we got was having to isolate people, and it was safe to come back. So yeah, it's just about following that logic and being really rigorous about it, so that you can, you have the temperature checks every morning and the health declaration, so you keep an eye on it as much as you can, and it's all just mitigating as much as you can.
Yeah, it would be incredibly difficult to prove somebody caught COVID on set rather than at the corner shop where they bought a paper before they came in. And one final question before we leave. Kieran Ryan is asking, how have different screening options distributions been considered for new projects? Has more thought gone into viewing off streaming platforms instead of theatres? Well, we're in the business of making short films. So for us, we've still been, encouraging people to think about festivals. Festivals have been really, really creative in terms of pivoting towards online and hybrid formats. So, I mean, we've still been encouraging people to think about a really strong festival strategy first, but also, of course, consider the online options where you can get a lot more viewers and arguably a lot more profile for your film. Have you been doing similar at NFTS?
Yeah, exactly all of that. I mean, I think there's a big opportunity as well at the moment, which is if you can get your film made over the next 12 months, there's probably less in the market. There's probably less kind of films out there. So actually making the effort to go through all of this prep and get your film finished and into post just gives you lots of options. And we're having conversations with online distributors and platforms like Short of the Week and people like that. But equally, we're having conversations with tier 1 and 2 festivals about next year, and they're thrilled we have a slate of films because they didn't think we would have. So that actually is that's an opportunity for us. Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. You don't want a complete sort of desert for short films if you're a festival programmer, do you? You want a pipeline. Well, I think that's it for today. Thanks ever so much, everybody, for your time and for sharing all the learning and everything that you've been going through over the past few months, and to the filmmakers for sharing their experiences and being so generous. Really, really appreciate it. And of course, thanks to Jon and Annalise and our friends at the NFTS, and good luck to anybody who is thinking about shooting a short film.
Good luck. Thank you, Jess, for pulling this together, making it happen.
Very much.
No worries. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Catch you later.
Stay safe.